Branson. I'm the Director of Assessments here at OSSI. We are really excited that you are here with us today for the October Next Generation Assessment meeting. I truly cannot believe it's October. I'm not sure about the rest of you. This fall has gone by quite quickly. But this fall meeting represents the kickoff of our assessment season. So we have a lot to share with you. We're going to be going over the overview of the system and the season in a way that we don't typically do in other months. So we're excited that you are all here. Please make sure to sign in the sign-in sheet in the chat. And we will get started. So Deanna, if you can go to the next slide. So just a couple housekeeping things before we get started. So because we have a pretty large group of folks on the phone today, please make sure to mute your microphone and turn off your video if you're not speaking to preserve some bandwidth. We are recording this meeting and we will be posting it for folks that aren't able to attend today, so everyone has all of the information they need. There is a sign-in sheet, as I mentioned, in the chat, but it's also linked here. And we have a link that we'll be sharing some resources as well. While we want everyone to stay off video and on mute while they're not talking to preserve bandwidth, when we ask questions or if you have questions.
So you have to register.
So please feel free when you have a question or you want to engage to take yourself on mute. Feel free to put your video on if you'd like, or type in the chat. We would love to answer everyone's questions. Anything that's too weedy we'll take offline, but muting now, putting yourself off mute when you want to engage. So every single meeting we start off with our mission and vision for the Office of the Assessment Team, and because it grounds us in why we are partnering in this work together. So I'll just read it to you all. In partnership with key stakeholders, we create a comprehensive, I can't read it on the screen while people keep joining, a comprehensive educational assessment program that accurately measures student performance, produces actionable data, and provides tools, guidance, and training to empower LEAs to meet the needs of all learners and make informed decisions. So again, it's the way we're grounding ourselves in the work we're partnering to do together. So the agenda today, as I mentioned, it's a really robust agenda. We have a lot to cover in a short amount of time. We'll start with just our introduction to statewide assessments. We will also have an update on the 2021 DC report card. Then we'll dive deeper into test administration for the coming year. We'll talk about the timeline, responsibilities, and then we'll go into each individual assessment from NAEP to Access, MSAA, DLM, PARCC, and DC Science. Then we'll move into our assessment policy section. You may have noticed that a number of policies were released yesterday, so we'll have an opportunity to talk about them today. And we'll also preview some of the upcoming test security policies that are coming this month. And our last section, we will be talking about broad NGA meetings and communications. Next slide. So starting with our introduction. Next slide. And team members, feel free to put your video on at this point so we can say hello to everyone. So many of you know us already, but if you are new, wanted to introduce the Office of Assessments, we will be partnering with you on a weekly basis throughout this season as you prepare for statewide assessments. So as I stated, my name is Danielle Branson. I am the Director of Assessments, and I've been with this team for 5 years and looking forward to this upcoming season after having some time, time that has been disrupted due to the impact of the pandemic. We are really looking forward to embarking on, a season where we're able to really get actionable data from our assessments.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Snyder. I'm the Deputy Director of Assessments here at OSSI. I've been with OSSI for about a year and a half, so this is my first what we hope to be a normal administration season for assessments. So very excited to be working with y'all and speaking with you today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Craig. I serve as the assessment specialist for special populations. So I oversee the administration of our alternate assessment and our assessment for English learners.
Thanks, Mike. And Deanna?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Deanna Santoro, and I'm the assessment specialist for test development, administration, and education. It's great to be here with you all.
I wanted to give an update for this group. Sia Hart, who is our NAEP state coordinator, has taken a new role outside of OSSI. We are really excited for her. She has been in OSSI for almost 10 years and has given such leadership and guidance to our team. So we're so grateful for her partnership and really excited for her next step. So that being said, we will make sure that everyone is fully supported in our transition. We will be posting our NAEP State Coordinator position on the 22nd, hopefully, fingers crossed. So if you do know of anyone who is interested, or you're interested yourself, it's a wonderful way to get into statewide assessment at the national level and at the federal level, which is really interesting from a policy perspective. So a plug for that. But if you do have questions about NAEP, please email ossi.assessment and we will make sure all of your questions are handled quickly. We have a really smooth transition plan, so we're ready for that. So we are excited to discuss our statewide assessment season for school year 21-22, which includes our NAEP assessments, our WIDA Access for ELLs 2.0, which has now transitioned to Access for ELLs, as well as the alternate access assessment, our PARCC assessments in ELA and mathematics, our MSAA alternate assessments in ELA and mathematics, as well as our science assessments, our DC science assessment, and our alternate science assessment, the dynamic learning maps assessment. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Donna Johnson, the Director of Accountability, to talk a little bit about the 2021 DC School Report Card. Donna?
Thank you, Danielle. I'm going to be brief. I think a number of you are probably familiar with the changes that are upcoming for the 2021 DC School Report Card, but for those that are not, I wanted to give a quick overview of what to expect for the 2021 DC School Report Card that will be released in early December of this year. So as you are all aware, we did receive a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education around many of the accountability requirements under the Every Student Succeeds Act. However, the publication and the reporting of the information on the report card is one of the things that is required. It was not waived. So we are publishing all of the available metrics on a DC School Report Card website. We will be publishing all of those metrics broken out and disaggregated by student group. We also will be publishing chronic absenteeism, which is a requirement for all states that are participating in the accountability waiver. We've previously had a metric similar to chronic absenteeism that we had called 90% attendance. And we've also always reported chronic absenteeism federally under federal reporting guidelines. We know that this is a very unusual year, and because of that, all of the metrics that we normally publish, we do not have data for, and they're not available to be published. We also know that there are a lot of differences in the way that students learned, in the way data was collected, in the environments that students learned in, and many of the other conditions that impact our metric calculations, as well as aggregations, and certainly the comparability of that data to prior year's calculations. So for example, when you think of some of the metrics that we will be publishing, such as attendance, discipline, student mobility, they all have significant comparability concerns with the 2021 data not being comparable to prior school year's data. And for that reason, we want to make sure that we are being responsible stewards of that data and that we are not putting people in a position to view data in a manner that is inappropriate from a data usage point of view. So one of the things that our current site does is that it displays historic data side by side with current year data. And as we said, we know that that is not going to be a proper data practice for many of the data metrics that we are publishing. And so because of that and other complications with the changes in the platform that our current report card site uses, OSSI has built and is in the process of building a brand new site that will temporarily allow us to present our data in the most responsible and accurate way that is going to be efficient and easily accessible and usable by all of our stakeholders. The next slide, please. Okay, all right. And so many of the things that you're going to see are going to be the same. You'll see the same user-friendly access. You'll be able to access the report card site from your laptop, your desktop computer, as well as your handheld device, whether it be a phone or a tablet. All of the metrics, as I said before, will be reported at each one of the student groups that you're used to seeing. Schools will continue to have individual report card pages, which we are referring to this year as School Snapshots. You will see familiar graphics, language that was built using stakeholder feedback back when we first developed the report card. We will still have a complete public data file with all of the metrics that are available at the school, the LEA, as well as the overall DC level. And we will still publish this, as I said before, in the very beginning of December 2021. But there are several things that will be different. So on the next slide, I'm going to go over that. So as I said before, we are publishing this on a brand new site, really due to making sure that we are appropriate stewards of the data. If you go to the current website, dcschoolreportcard.org, as of today, you will see a bright yellow banner on there that will tell you that the only information held on this site is historic data, and will direct you to a new site where, coming in December, you'll be able to see this year's school report card. We are also creating some user guides and helpful usage tips that users will be able to use so that they'll be able to explore and use this new website most efficiently and effectively. One of the things that we are doing very differently is, in the past, the user site, the report card site, you went to a landing page and you either had to go to a map of a school, or you had to type in the name of a school and you were directed to a school page. There was a link in the bottom that took you to an overall DC page, but one of the most frequently asked questions was, well, where do I see the data about DC overall? And so one of the things that we're doing in this new page is we're actually presenting the DC overall data to you up front. And you're going to see that on each one of the domain pages, whether it be about enrollment or attendance, academic performance metrics. You'll see all of that from a DC lens. And then you'll be able to see the school level data in those school snapshots or in the public files. The other thing that's going to be different this year is that when you're looking at the state level data, it's going to be a bit more interactive. Many of the metrics have filters that you can use. So if you want to disaggregate by grade span, if you want to look at it by ward, if you want to look at it by student group, you'll be able to select the items that you want to view the data by so that you're able to customize the data and view it in the manner that's most appropriate for you. And next page, please. So here's a quick view snapshot of the way the landing page will look. So very different than the current page where you had that big blue box with the map and typing in a school. You'll see that the categories are organized in domains. Some of them are grayed out right now. As I said, we are in the process of development. So this is a development page. And once we are finalized with everything, we're actually in the process of the final bits of metric calculation confirmation with all of your LEAs right now. Once we go live, all of those domains will be bright and they'll have data elements right there. You'll click on any of those domains, whether it be enrollment, looking at attendance. You can look at school environment, multiple metrics in there, as well as learning environment. And then you'll be able to click on the school snapshots. There'll be resources just as there were before. And all of those metrics, if you want to know which metrics are going to be available, which metrics are not, we have a nice chart in the technical guide of the report card. And then I believe there is a document that will be sent out following this meeting with a more detailed listing of all of the metrics that are available and are not available. Next slide, please. And last but not least, just a couple of snapshot pictures for you to get an idea of what to expect in December. So I mentioned that the domain pages will have filterable options for users to use. You're looking at a snapshot there of a school enrollment page where you can see some KPIs displayed for ever enrolled as well as for audit. There will be more graphs if you were to scroll down that page. And then over to the right, you can see some snapshots of what the school snapshots look like. They look very similar to what you're used to seeing for your current school profile page. And then as you scroll down, you'll see more pages that show the actual data presented on the report card at the school level. These will be able to be printed out as PDFs and schools can use those. You can provide them. We'll have links that you can share out with your communities and families so that they can see your school information directly. If there are any questions, feel free to email me. You can also email our report card email page, which is dcschoolreportcard@dc.gov, or as always, email me directly. That's all I have to share today, Danielle. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Donna.
Thanks, Donna. I'm going to switch gears a little bit now, and we're going to get into some high-level descriptions of the statewide assessments in DC that will be administered in spring 2022. Just wanted to let you all know we will be sharing a lot of information fairly quickly, but this initial introduction is just a very high-level introduction, and we will definitely go into more details in subsequent meetings and through additional training channels. So if you don't catch everything today, please don't worry about it. There will be plenty of opportunities to connect with us and to learn more about each of the assessments and the steps you'll need to take to prepare for administration. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Deanna to walk through our assessment calendar for this year.
Thank you, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. Great to be here with you all. So we're going to transition now to that overview that Stephanie was talking about for the 21-22 school year. We're going to start by looking at the assessment windows for all of our assessments, and we're going to look at some resources that are currently available on our webpage to help you prepare for the year. So on this slide, you will see our statewide assessment windows for school year 2021-22. As you look at this slide, I will not read it directly, but we do want to note a couple of things. The first is that all schools who will be participating in NAEP have already been notified. So if you have been notified, you have received communication directly, and if not, then that is not something that you need to focus on. We also want to share that the 30-day consecutive window restriction has been removed for our upcoming administration, which means that schools can test at any point in the published window, and there are more details in our participation and performance policy. We will be discussing that towards the end of our meeting. We also want to note that the administration windows for PARCC and DC Science are April 4th to May 27th for computer-based testing, but for paper accommodations, that is April 4th until May 20th. This is another view of the same information from the previous slide, but it was produced for those of you who, like me, may be more of visual learners and processors. If you decide to print this slide, in grayscale, it should be interpretable from that. And we do want to note that we did not include on this calendar the February break that some LEAs have. So if you do have any additional school breaks, you may want to add them to this calendar before sharing them with your teams. So among some of the resources that the OSSI assessment team has already released to our webpage, one of them is the 2021-22 statewide assessment activity schedule for LEA assessment managers. This resource is a one-pager that provides the highest level view of assessment activities for test security broadly, access for ELLs, alternate access, MSAA, DLM, PARCC, and DC Science. You can see here that the PARCC and DC Science assessment states are aligned, and similarly, MSAA and DLM testing dates are aligned for 2022 test administration. NAEP is not included in this resource since it doesn't apply to all LEAs and schools. And as a reminder, schools who have been selected for NAEP have already been notified. So you can find this assessment resource among the other assessment resources I'm going to go over on the Test Coordinators resource webpage, which is linked on this slide. So diving in a little more deeply, on this slide, you can see the DC assessment coordination timeline, and this zooms into the specific action items needed for assessment administration in the order that they will occur over the assessment cycle. So this is color-coded by who an action is required from. You'll see that the orange squares are an LEA submission to OSSI. The medium blue is LEA action. The light blue is school action overseen by the LEA. The red is shipment to or from a school. And the dark blue is an OSSI action. We would like to note that the first 3 orange squares on this test coordination timeline are active, and which means that there are next steps for LEAs. So the first 2 orange boxes that say select LEA test coordinator and submit to OSSI, and the second one that says determine test windows and submit to OSSI, were a next step outlined in the August NGA meeting, and has been given as a reminder throughout between the August NGA meeting and today's NGA meeting. So that next step is due this upcoming Monday, and we encourage you, if you have not already, to complete the form that was included in the NGA bulletin to fulfill those actions. The third orange box says apply for alternate assessments. This action was also shared in NGA bulletins and is due tomorrow, October 15th. Later in today's presentation, Michael Craig, OSSI's assessment specialist for special populations, will speak more deeply around this third action item on this timeline. So moving along, this next slide is also familiar from previous NGA meetings. This slide outlines the roles and responsibilities of LEA assessment managers at a high level. It does not include all of the details, and you can find more details on the roles and responsibilities of assessment points of contact outlined on the OSSI Test Coordinators resource page. As a reminder, it's the responsibility of the LEA assessment manager to represent the LEA, liaise between OSSI and LEA and school staff, and coordinate with non-public school test coordinators around student registration. For each assessment, there will also be an LEA assessment coordinator, and this individual can be the same as the LEA assessment manager, or it could be the same person for multiple assessments. Any individuals who are selected to serve in these roles need to subscribe to the NGA bulletin by updating their roles in eSchool Plus. And as a reminder, that NGA bulletin goes out to anyone who is labeled in eSchool Plus as an assessment point of contact, LEA assessment manager, MSAA coordinator, and access coordinator. That being said, if you are joining us and you are a representative from a non-public school, you can gain access to the NGA bulletin by emailing ossi.assessment@dc.gov. So the first step in that assessment coordination timeline in that first orange box was to select the LEA assessment manager and assessment and test coordinators. So again, that form was shared in the August NGA meeting and in NGA bulletins and is due this upcoming Monday, October 18th. Having that up-to-date contact information is going to be essential to ensure that test administration goes smoothly, but it will also allow us to implement some of the feedback you gave us over the summer. Specifically, LEAs and non-public schools shared during interviews this past summer that having OSSI play more of a role facilitating the connection between LEAs and non-public schools during this fall would be really helpful. In order for us to really make good on that word, it's important that you fill out this form so that we have that contact information and we can facilitate those connections. At this time, we are about halfway there. So slightly over 50% of non-public schools and slightly under 50% of LEAs have completed this form linked on this slide. We know that this is a very busy time of the year and that everyone has a lot on their plate. So please let us know if we can be supportive in any way as you complete this next step by Monday at the latest. For transparency, attendance to today's NGA meeting and completing this contact information form by the deadline on Monday, October 18th, is going to be the first compliance indicators that the OSSI assessment team collects for 2022 statewide summative test administration cycle. If you have any questions about this form, including if you're not sure if you've already submitted it or not, or how to update any previously submitted information, please email us at ossi.assessment@dc.gov. And another resource. So as mentioned before, the test coordinators resource page, webpage has been updated and is a comprehensive place to find links to trainings, manuals, and other resources across all assessments. On this webpage, you can also find this document called the Coordinating Statewide Assessments Guide. This resource specifically provides an overview of test administration for all assessments. That being said, it is not meant to replace other trainings, readings, and resources produced by OSSI and produced by our assessment vendors, such as their manuals or training modules. This resource in particular provides a detailed overview that would be most helpful to LEA assessment managers and school test coordinators. Once again, thank you for all of the feedback you provided us over the summer around the timely release of these resources and having a unified location for these resources. We really took that feedback to heart as we prepared the resources that I just went over and the next steps and the timeline that we have established. Thank you so much. I am here to answer questions if we have the time and space to field some. But we welcome you if questions arise. If we don't have the time, to please type them into the chat and we will respond to them. Or you can email me directly at deanna.santoro@dc.gov or email our team at aussie.assessment@dc.gov.
Thanks, Deanna. Now we're going to spend some time going in, giving an overview of each of our assessments. For some of you who have done this for a number of years, this is going to feel very familiar to you, but we do have a lot of new folks joining us. So we want to give broad strokes introductions to each assessment. So let's talk about NAEP. NAEP, as it states here, is the only assessment that measures every state in the country, DC and Puerto Rico, on measures of what students in the country know and can do in certain subjects, including English language arts, mathematics, science, civics, and others. It is the only tool we have available to us longitudinally to measure across the entire country. The assessment provides national, state, and jurisdiction comparisons and allows states to disaggregate results by student groups. It is worth noting that because NAEP is federally mandated, all states and districts receiving Title I funding are required to participate in the program. Many of our key stakeholders do use NAEP results to help inform their progress and improve educational outcomes and inform a lot of large-scale research studies. DC is considered a take-all state, so we do have most of our students participating in the grades that are assessed during each cycle. Next slide, please. So this graphic here talks a little bit about the two major components of the NAEP program. It has main NAEP, what we call main NAEP, and then our long-term trend NAEP, which you had some experience with in the past couple of years. Main NAEP assessments are conducted in a range of subjects in grades 4, 8, and 12. Assessments are given most frequently in mathematics and reading in grades 4 and 8 every 2 years as required by our federal mandate. There are other subjects such as civics, science, technology, and engineering literacy, US history, and writing, and these are assessed more periodically. Our national results are available for all assessments and subjects, and then state and district results are provided in mathematics and reading. We are in a main NAEP year, which we will be getting both the national data and DC specific data, both for DC broadly and for our TUDA, our Trial Urban District, which is DC Public Schools. The long-term trend NAEP measures student performance at the national level in mathematics and reading over time, and it uses questions and question formats that have remained relatively unchanged since its inception. Federal law requires the long-term trend to be administered at regular intervals, and CES generally conducts the long-term trend in math and reading every 4 years. We do have one minor component of the long-term trend to finish up this year, but it is primarily a main NAEP year. Next slide. This graphic just talks a little bit about the NAEP assessment cycle. NAEP's annual assessment cycle is designed to ensure that the results meet the highest standards of measurement reliability, validity, and accuracy. This is critically important because of the longitudinal nature of the assessment and because of its claims to be able to compare states across the country. So it tends to be one of our most rigorous assessments when it comes to what it can and cannot share and its technical requirements. The assessment is administered between January and March. and state level results are generally reported 6 months after the final administration. We have historically released results in October or November of the same year. Again, that can change based on transition, but that's been what's typically happened. In a year where there's only national reporting, not this year, but when it's only national reporting, results may not be available for 12 to 18 months after the final assessment is administered because of different research studies that are being conducted. But this year is a main NAEP year where we will have DC-specific data. Next slide. So this gives a little bit of an overview of the NAEP school selection process. Schools are identified based on USCD's public school system database. Non-public private schools are also included in the national sample. But we only compare ourselves to public schools, which would include our traditional public system and our charter schools. Schools are classified into groups by location, by demographics, and sorted with student achievement measures to ensure NAEP represents all levels of student performance. NCES does draw the sample of schools to ensure that we have small schools, diverse schools, private schools adequately represented across the nation. The state receives the list of schools selected and confirms whether the school is eligible to participate. Eligibility typically follows whether or not they have the appropriate grades. And because we are a really small jurisdiction, we are a take-all, or primarily take-all state. Next slide. Student selection. After we select schools, we select students in a specific grade that's been selected for the chosen schools. Student demographic information is included with each student, and we have a specific NCES selection method to include which students will get each subject, because students are not tested across all subjects, they get a selection for them. In order to provide a large enough sample size, as I mentioned before, all students are needed at schools that offer grades 4 and or grade 8, and if you've been doing this a while, you're very familiar with that process. The final student selection is available to schools in early December through My NAEP for Schools database. And I know we're going through the registration process right now to get that sample finalized. Next slide. For those new to NAEP, I think it's really important to talk about the history and the longitudinal nature of this study. The next slides show DC's performance on NAEP since the early 2000s. Since 2019, DC was identified as the fastest improving state in the country. Since 2003. These line charts here, and it looks like we're missing the header for reading, my apologies, for math and reading in grade 4. And the deeper blue line, a little bit hard to see, but the deeper blue line on the bottom represents DC, and the fainter line is the national public. DC has steadily shown gains in grade 4, and our students are closing the gap with the nation in both subjects that you can see here. Next slide. In grade 8, we see a similar story. We do see some gains and progress toward closing the gap with the national public, but it's notable that across the board and across the nation, reading has been fairly flat. DC students have made smaller gains during that time than in mathematics, and NAEP, as well as their governing board, has done a lot of work over the past couple of years thinking about bringing together experts to talk about reading performance across the nation and what that means. We have tried to partner with them, and we have partnered with them in conducting research to look at the lack of growth in these areas. So something to be thinking about over the next couple of years. Let's talk a little bit about NAEP 2022 administration. So we'll move to the next slide. So here are some session updates for everyone. The assessment window, January 24th to March 4th, 2022. There are 2 sessions. Their session duration is approximately 2 hours, and there are 25 students per session, grades 4 and 8, reading and mathematics, and each student will only get 1 subject to assess in. Selected schools should have received a letter in September indicating the scheduled assessment date for each grade. As you move forward with planning for assessment day, please keep in mind certain restrictions around NAEP's coordination of testing sessions, as that's handled by NAEP staff. For the online assessments, NAEP representatives are limited to 25 tablets for use at a time. They do bring their technology with them. So they set up everything, bring their technology with them, and then bring it back with them. Larger student populations will require the NAEP assessment team to add more tested sessions, but we can work with individual schools to ensure you're set up appropriately. In 2019, I know that many schools wanted to have testing completed in the morning session alone, and NAEP worked really hard to make sure that happened. But in 2022, we're going to have to utilize afternoon sessions as well, given the scheduling challenges. So we will have both afternoon and morning sessions, but we will be working with individual schools on any scheduling needs they have. Your school will have your schools will have the ability to indicate which students they want in any session, maybe based on classroom cohorts or different accommodations requirements. But we couldn't necessarily require all sessions to be in the AM and the PM. Next slide. We're receiving a little bit of feedback, so if you're not speaking, if you can put yourself on mute. Thanks so much. So some upcoming activities, some reminders and next steps. The past 2 items were communicated in this week's NGA bulletin, but want to reiterate the importance of getting them done so we can get our sample and registration set up. So the school coordinator survey was due, identifying the school point of contact for NAEP. It is necessary to complete the school information in my NAEP database. I know some of you have been getting emails. You'll continue to get reminder emails, but please do complete that. It's really critical for our filing system. School leaders should have been asked to complete that survey. 50%, I believe, of schools have registered and or indicated who their school coordinator will be for NAEP. School coordinators will receive a welcome letter once they're identified. So I really ask that you touch base with your school to confirm. The school coordinator must be registered in my NAEP system under their own account by November 1st. So that's a critical deadline. With the provide school information task in my NAEP, either the school leader, the school coordinator, or you may be completing this task. We do need one point of contact for that. If you're an LEA leader serving as a school coordinator, you'll use the school registration ID. This is something that I know that SWIA really wanted people to know. If you're an LEA leader and want to complete a specific task for the school, you'll use the district registration ID. All this information is in the LEA bulletin or the NGA bulletin, but wanted to highlight that again for you. And please email us at ossi.assessment@dc.gov if you have any questions or if you need the registration ID resent to you. Happy to help with that. So a couple administration resources wanted to call out for you. There are a number of things that will be available on the NAEP page of the OSSI website, which will be updated very shortly. We have parent notification letters available in 7 languages. We also have the accommodations guides, which we call the NAEP inclusion policies, and those should be up in the next week or so. Please just highlight to look for reminders in the NGA bulletin to share back critical information with your team, as we'll be updating throughout the season. I covered a lot here. I wanted to pause to see if there are any questions. With no questions. Oh, did someone have a question? Since there seem to be no questions, I'll turn it over to Mike. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you, Danielle. So I'm going to spend some time talking about our WIDA Access for ELLs assessment and alternate access assessment. So just a brief overview of the WIDA Consortium. It is designed to implement proficiency standards and assessments for students in grades K through 12 who are English learners. Our students in DC participate in Access and Alternate Access. WIDA is formerly known as the World Class Instructional Design Assessment, and it was initially made up of states from Wisconsin, Delaware, and Arkansas. But now there are at least 40 member states, territories, and federal agencies that are part of the WIDA Consortium. Some of the assessments that are a part of the system include the WIDA Screener for online and paper, Kindergarten WAPT, our Kindergarten Screener, WIDA Model online and paper, Kindergarten Model, Access for ELLs, online and paper, Kindergarten Access, and Alternate Access for ELLs. So we have a wide variety of assessments that are available under the WIDA Consortium. So each year, LEAs have to complete activities in preparation for access assessment. So your first activity is submitting the WIDA AMS site ID file to OSSI. This file is basically for LEAs to provide their contact information. So LEA school names, addresses, and your test coordinator contact information. This is where we will use this for shipping materials and student reports directly to schools. The file layout was released in the September 14th NGA bulletin, and the deadline to return the site ID file was October 8th. So all site ID files should have been returned to me by October 8th. If you have not done so, please submit this file as soon as possible. If you need additional time, feel free to reach out to me, and I can give you an extension until October 22nd. But if you have not done so, again, please contact me directly at michael.craig@dc.gov. And if an LEA does not submit the site ID for a file for this year, the contact information from previous school year will be used. But we really want to make sure we have up-to-date information so we have material shipped to the correct person. Additionally, LEAs will have to submit the pre-ID assessment using the pre-ID Quickbase application. So the pre-ID file is basically your registration file for students that will be participating in Access and alternate access. The Access for ELLs pre-ID Quickbase application will open to LEAs on November 2nd. This is where LEAs will verify student demographic information, indicate required accommodations if warranted, and indicate which model of administration is required, so either online or paper. Additional information will be released about the pre-ID Quickbase application in upcoming NGA bulletins, but it will open November 2nd and it will close December 14th. But again, additional information will be released prior to the opening of the Quickbase application. Next slide. All right, so our next assessment for special populations is our multi-state alternate assessment, also known as MSAA, which is our comprehensive assessment system designed to promote increasing higher academic outcomes for students with significant cognitive disabilities in preparation for a broader array of post-secondary outcomes. MSAA is administered annually to students in ELA in mathematics for students in grades 3 through 8 and 11, and it is available in 11 territories. We are a part of the MSAA Consortium. The assessment measures what students can do in relation to the alternate achievement standards, and it is also a stage adaptive assessment which allows students to interact with the items more accurately and reflect the student's abilities when taking the assessment. Next slide. All right, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Mike. You can go to the next slide, Deanna. Dynamic learning maps is the alternate assessment for science that is used in the District of Columbia. So it is for students with significant cognitive disabilities in grades 5, 8, and high school biology. Dynamic learning maps is also part of an assessment consortium, and you can see the participating states and territories listed here. DLM assessments are computer-based, and the consortium is facilitated by the Accessible Teaching and Learning Assessment Systems, or ATLAS, team at the University of Kansas. You can go to the next slide. The DLM assessments are built to allow students to show multiple ways of demonstrating their knowledge, skills, and understandings. DLM comes with its own specific accessibility tools and supports built in to make sure that it's satisfying the needs of all students that are taking it. And decisions about the use of those specific tools and supports are made for each student by their IEP teams. As I mentioned, DLM is administered just like the general science assessment to students who are in grades 5, 8, or enrolled in high school biology. DLM is reported out on 4 performance levels that are listed here. Level 1 is emerging, level 2 approaching the target, level 3 is at target, and level 4 is advanced. And DLM individual student reports are released in conjunction with the results for DC science assessments. A little bit about DLM test coordinator training. DLM recently released updated videos and supplemental resources for this school year to help district test coordinators and data managers with preparing to implement the DLM assessment for this school year. You can see the types of resources that are available. The bullets are listed here. I won't read through all of them, but the link here will take you to those resources, and it's self-paced, so you can go in and look at it at any point in time to make sure that you are ready for DLM administration in the spring. DLM will be holding a live DC-specific test coordinator training in January, a webinar, and then a follow-up virtual question and answer session in early February. So if you do want to get a little bit ahead of the game and go through the self-paced resources, you may do that now, but also know that additional training for DC is coming in January. One change for this year that I'd like to note in DLM system in their portal is that each LEA may only designate one person as the role of district test coordinator in that portal. In the past, more than one person within an LEA could be designated in that way. They've changed the requirements this year such that only one person will be able to fulfill that role. And I believe DLM has been emailing LEAs that do have more than one person designated at this time so that LEAs can express their preference for who should be the one point of contact. So if you have received those emails and haven't responded yet, please do so. Starting in the next week or so, DLM will be cleaning up the system to only have one person designated as the district test coordinator, and anyone else will be their permissions will change to district user, which are very similar but not quite the same as district test coordinator. So it's important that LEAs express their preference to DLM by responding to that email. Additionally, if you do have questions about who is currently listed as your district test coordinator, you can feel free to email me at stephanie.snyder@dc.gov. One thing that's new this year for DLM, which I wanted to point out, is the use of instructionally embedded assessments. So these are optional, and they're computer-delivered testlets, just like the year-end DLM assessment. But the instructionally embedded assessments are meant to be taken throughout the school year to really integrate classroom instruction and assessment. So with this model, test administrators have the flexibility to select which specific elements, essential elements, they would like to assess students on throughout the year. So those testlets could be given very closely after instruction has happened, and they're able to be customized for each student. And so the reports coming from those assessments may inform future instructional decisions before the end of year window in the spring. That instructionally embedded assessment window, optional window, is currently open now and will be open through close to the end of February. Online training for administering those instructionally embedded assessments is available at the link that you see here, but we will also be offering a DC-specific training opportunity for test coordinators to learn more about how to use that instructionally the instructionally embedded resources and the instructional planner that is part of the DLM portal. That training is next week at October 21st from 10 to 12. There's a link here to register. That training will be recorded. The recording will likely be available a couple weeks after the training, but in order to be able to use the instructional planner and administer this instructionally embedded model, there is required training. So you can learn more about that at the session next week or at the link that's on the middle bullet on this screen. Moving from instructionally embedded to spring year-end administration. So test administrator training, not test coordinator, but test administrator training for DLM for the spring is also currently open right now. This is a self-directed set of modules that is available through the DLM Moodle training site. You do need to have an active account in their Educator portal in order to be able to take this training. And once that account is activated, you will be able to access the self-paced training course. Additional information can be found in the guide that DLM provides for states that are using this year-end model, and that link is here as well. One thing I do want to note is that DLM does differentiate their test administrator training for new test administrators and returning test administrators. But because DC did not assess in DLM last year. All test administrators for DLM for spring 2022 will be required to take the training for new test administrators. Even if they've done it in the past, it will have been at least 3 years by that point. So DLM requires that all test administrators involved with DLM this year will take the set of modules for new test administrators that are available on their portal. So that is open now. Those can be taken now or at any point before the testing window opens in the spring. Next slide. Last slide on DLM. DLM and Atlas are always looking for educators who may be interested in participating in test development events throughout the year, such as testlet development and review and score validation. So if you or educators in your LEAs are interested in participating, there is kind of an online survey interest form that is linked here that you can fill out to be put into the pool of possible reviewers for DLM assessments. So if that is of interest, please feel free to check it out. Next slide. I'll turn it over to Deanna now to talk more about PARCC.
Thank you, Stephanie. I also want to name that I just dropped into the chat. As we said before, we're going through a lot of information very quickly in today's kickoff. So all of our contact information is included on the page linked in the chat. And if you need to reach out to us, we encourage you to do so at any time. I will be speaking to our PARCC assessment. So PARCC stands for the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers. This assessment is aligned to the Common Core state standards and measures the knowledge and skills for ELA and math for the general student population. Students in grades 3 through 8 and high school who are not eligible for alternate assessments take this assessment each spring. For high school, we want to note that we are no longer offering the integrated math assessments. So the high school math assessments are Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2. And there is ELA 1 for 9th grade and ELA 2 for 10th grade. When we discuss the participation and performance policy, we will go into much more detail about the assessment requirements for PARCC. So one thing that is not news, we have shared this in previous NGA meetings, but we want to remind everyone of, is that we have switched to the alternate blueprint option, the ABO for short, which is a more efficient version of the PARCC assessment. So with this new model, the unit structure and times reflect the changes of reduced test time, which we are really excited for because we know that this has been a piece of feedback that you have given us, and we're excited to be able to put it into effect. So in order to do this, we became more efficient in how we're measuring the standards. There is the same content coverage, but there are fewer items and in some cases fewer units, as you can see on this slide. So this reduction in the blueprint and the testing time will help in reducing the administrative burdens for LEAs and schools, and may impact how you think about scheduling your test sessions and hopefully alleviate some of the challenges that we know that you have experienced in the past. So unit testing time is different from administration time. And what we mean by that is the time it takes for students to sit down and take the assessment is what is listed on this slide. But administration time may require more time than that, and that might include getting students settled into the room, TAs to read the directions, and for assessment closeout activities. So the test coordinator's manual and test administrator's manual for PARCC and for DC Science will include both the testing times and approximate administration times for each of these assessments. So we also want to name that we do, for the most part, know how field testing will take place in our spring administration in 2022. So for math, field testing items are embedded in the units. There is no additional field testing units outside of what you see on this slide. For ELA, however, grades 3, 6, and 1 high school grade will have an additional field testing unit. So for grades 3, 6, and 1 high school grade, instead of there being 2 units, there will be 3 units for ELA, and one of those will be the field test unit. We're still working with our vendor to determine whether the high school field test will be for grade 9 ELA 1 or for grade 10 ELA 2. As soon as we determine this with our vendors, we will share that information with you via the NGA bulletin, because we know that having this information as early in advance is really helpful in figuring out your testing schedules. This slide provides links to PARCC assessment resources that may be particularly helpful to educators, including released items, assessment blueprints, and evidence statements. Sharing these resources with educators before test administration may be helpful in building their understanding of PARCC and their assessment literacy more broadly. So more details and resources on the PARCC assessment can be found at OSSE's PARCC webpage, which has been updated for the 2021-22 school year. Another great opportunity for building educators' assessment literacy is recommending that they apply to join the test development participation pool for PARCC and DC Science. Attending test development events is a great opportunity for continuous improvement in that it allows educators to take a deep dive into the assessment development process, from item development to bias and sensitivity review to data review to range finding, and more. If you know an educator or an academic leader in DC who may be interested in applying to join the test development pool, please share the application linked on this slide with them. This application has also been included in recent NGA bulletins for your reference, but we do want to name that the application closes on Monday, October 18th, and that we have fortunately received a lot of applicants. So as you complete those applications, know that we will be reaching out in late October with decisions on who will be selected to be a part of that pool of test development participants. Once educators and academic leaders are in that test development participation pool of educators, they will be selected for specific events and invited to join as we are planning and preparing for those events throughout the year. This covers really the content side of the PARCC assessment, but after we transition to talk about the DC Science assessment, we will talk about administration updates for both PARCC and for DC Science. So know that we will be circling back to this assessment after we talk about DC Science. And with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Stephanie.
Thanks, Deanna. And I think after I go through DC Science and we talk a little bit more about administration updates, we can take a bit of a longer pause to answer any questions that may arise from those presentations. You can go to the next slide. So the DC Science assessment is aligned to the next generation science standards, which were adopted a few years ago by the District of Columbia in 2014. And the DC Science assessment is structured to assess the NGSS, specifically the 3 dimensions of the NGSS, the scientific and engineering practices, cross-cutting concepts and disciplinary core ideas in grades 5, 8, and high school biology. You can go to the next slide. Because the science assessments are only at those 3 grades or courses, the assessment is designed to cover NGSS expectations across grade levels. So the grade 5 assessment assesses performance expectations in grades 3 through 5 in physical sciences, life sciences, and earth and space sciences. Similarly, the grade 8 assessment addresses middle school grades 6 through 8 performance expectations. And high school biology targets the high school life science NGSS performance expectations. As I mentioned before, the assessments are designed to address the multiple dimensions of the NGSS that are listed here. We can go to the next slide. The DC assessment structure really takes into account that the multiple dimensions of NGSS and is designed in a way to assess students on those 3 dimensions. They're administered in the assessment is administered in 4 45-minute units, and each unit includes 3 item clusters, and the cluster is a set of items that are presented around a common stimulus or phenomenon, and all the items in that cluster address that one phenomenon. They provide context and focus for the item clusters, and the results are reported out in 4 performance levels. You can see the levels noted here. The scale score of 450 indicates students meet expectations, and the science assessments are reported out on a scale of 300 to 600. Next slide. Something that is slightly new for this year and we're really excited about is a number of assessment resources have been developed for the DC Science Assessment. And these resources include both introductory videos that explain what the resources are, but also go into much more detail about the structure of the performance level descriptors for science, and how items are written and how the tests are put together. And one resource that's particularly noteworthy that's new are these classroom assessment guides that really go into detail about what good assessment items at the classroom level can look like and what good science instruction can look like. And so it's just another way to bridge to make connections between assessment and instruction. And I encourage you all to go to the link here and check out those resources and share them with folks in your LEAs. And before we transition to test administration updates, just want to give one more plug that the test development event application is available for not only ELA and math test development events, but also for science test development events. So those are a good way for science educators to once again make those connections between classroom instruction and assessments and provide some really good professional learning opportunities. So we'll encourage science educators, anyone who's interested, to think about applying for participation in those test development events. I'll turn it back over to Deanna. Yes. Danielle.
Just a quick note, Stephanie, I believe someone in the chat asked for the link to the educator development application.
I believe it's in a previous slide in this presentation, but I'll also grab it and make sure that we put it into the chat.
Yes, and thank you for requesting that link. We love to see the excitement for participating in these events because the more perspectives and voices we have in these events, the better our assessments are, whether it's for PARCC and DC Science or for any of our other assessments. So thank you for requesting that, and thank you for sharing it with people who may be interested in developing their assessment literacy and being a part of making our statewide assessments the best they can be. So we're now going to dive into PARCC and DC Science test administration updates. So as we mentioned before, PARCC and DC Science will share an test administration window in spring 2022. And we also want to note, for those who may be new to these assessments, that the systems that are used for both PARCC and DC Science are the same. And that is what we'll be discussing in this section of our presentation. So this slide covers some broad administration updates since our last administration in 2019. First off, we want to note that the SRP&P, which stands for the Student Registration and Personal Needs Profile, will include demographic field updates that will help us to better align our categories and the language that OSSE uses for PARCC and DC Science reporting. There will also be an option at the LEA level to opt out of paper manuals for PARCC and DC Science this year. So that includes the manuals for test coordinators and the test administrator manuals. This decision will be at an LEA level. So this may be something that you want to talk with schools about around their preferences on whether you would like to opt out of receiving paper manuals or not. If you do not indicate anything for this section, you will be shipped some paper manuals. We also want to name that shipments of secure materials, which include test booklets, answer sheets, and so on, will be sent as individual items and will no longer be sent in sets of 5 as they had been in the past. Both PARCC and DC Science use the Pearson Access Next system, which we commonly refer to as PAN. I started earlier this year, and getting used to the acronym PAN will be very helpful. So while PAN is scheduled to be opened to LEAs in December. In the past, it's opened in January, but this is another place where we're working really diligently to implement feedback and get it opened earlier. We also want to name that the critical warning flag will not be given for fields that are not required by OSSI. So if you have missing information for things that are not required, it will not generate a critical warning flag in the system. PAN will also limit the assignment of tests to avoid duplicate assignments to the same test form. So for example, there's going to be a safeguard so that you are not able to assign 2 grade 4 ELA tests to the same student. And we hope that that will be helpful in avoiding any unforeseen challenges. One thing that is new is that there will be an option in PAN this year to do a mass deletion of empty test sessions. So rather than having to go in and delete test sessions that are empty individually, there will be a feature so that you can delete multiple sessions at a time to hopefully once again ease that administrative burden. Pearson Access Next will also this year have an updated view when you log in the dashboards. And it's going to provide school and LEA level users with some overarching kind of holistic data on where students are in their test sessions and which students have been tested. It can be filtered by grade and by different features. We will not be diving into those dashboards today, but that will be something that we'll be talking about in our December NGA meeting and in our new PARCC test coordinators trainings, which are scheduled this December and in January. As I mentioned before, PAN will look a little different this year. On the right side of the screen, you can see a quick view of how PAN has looked in the past. The previous display is at the bottom, and above you can see the new PAN display. The reason why we're making this update is that drop-down feature will be available no matter where you are in PAN. And hopefully that'll reduce the number of clicks that are required when you're doing your student registration and you're assigning students to test sessions. So while it will look a little bit different, we want you to know that the functionality will remain the same and that this change really was a change that we decided to move forward with in the hopes that it will make using PAN a bit easier for you. Once again, we're not going to go into detail on these changes here, but we will have more information in the December NGA meeting and in the new PARCC and DC Science test coordinator trainings in December and January. On the left side of the screen, you can see a screenshot of TestNav 8. TestNav 8 is the testing platform that is used for both PARCC and for DC Science. So here are a few notes on TestNav 8. An updated version of TestNav 8 application is available and can be downloaded. TestNav will include an inactivity timer at 20 minutes. So if a student device does not register activity such as typing, touching the touchpad, or scrolling for 20 minutes, the student test will be automatically logged out. The system will still allow the test administrator to resume the test session and for students to log back in with their username and password and continue working. When we were considering remote administration last year, one update that we had was an auto resume feature where test administrators wouldn't have to click a button in PAN to resume testing. That will not be a feature this upcoming year. So we're basically going back to business as usual. If a student is booted from an assessment or logs out of the assessment during the administration session that's taking place, it will be the same as in previous years that test administrators will need to press resume on their end for students to be able to continue with their test. On this slide, you can see some of the PARCC and DC Science specific resources. There are updated resources that we talked about earlier together at the beginning of our time on the test coordinator resources page. You'll notice I'm saying that over and over again because it really does have a lot of the information that you will need in your role for a successful test administration this year. And that includes that coordinating statewide assessment guide, that test administration timeline, the statewide assessment activity schedule, the event schedule, the training schedule for the upcoming year, the LEA assessment manager roles and responsibilities, non-public test coordinator roles and responsibilities, your test security information. It will all be linked on our website. We also want to name that the test coordinator and test administrator manuals for PARCC and DC Science will be available in January and will begin arriving at schools in March if you do not opt out of receiving paper manuals. Also, we included the links on this slide for Pearson Access Next, TestNav 8, and their administration information, training modules, and practice tests. And finally, my final note, which is a holistic note to all of our assessments, is that we received some great feedback that it would be helpful, not just for OSSE to give information to LEAs, but for LEAs to have an opportunity to kind of cross-pollinate and hear the success stories of each other to make sure that they're constantly and continuously improving their systems and practices for test administration. So in November, we will have what we're coining assessment support convenings. An assessment support convening is an event that is facilitated by OSSE, but is hosted and led by an LEA. We have some really great topics and some really great presenters and hosts that are in our audience that have expressed interest in hosting some of these meetings. So in next week's NGA bulletin, when we send out the slides of this presentation and the recording, we'll also be revealing those events that are coming up in November. If this sounds interesting to you, if there is a practice, maybe your test security practices or your training practices for your test administrators and test coordinators, and you would like to host an assessment support convening, I encourage you to email us at ossie.assessment@dc.gov. The email will go to me directly, and I would love to set up a time with you to discuss possible topics and next steps for hosting. But more to come in next week's NGA bulletin. And with that, I will pass it over to Danielle, but maybe we can pause for questions if we have time.
Yes, thanks, Deanna. I just wanted to stop here for a few questions that have popped up in the chat. And then also, if there are any other questions after we address those, please feel free. Scrolling back up, there's ask for some clarification about the unit test time for field test units in ELA. So Dana, could you actually go back to that slide? Apologies for the scrolling. Sure. So as we mentioned, there will be for ELA an additional field test unit in grades 3, 6, and one of the high school grades that we're still working with our vendor to determine. So the chart that you see here for ELA shows that there are 2 units. Those are D2 operational units, and then the field test unit would be an additional one on top of that, so it would be a 3rd unit. This chart may look a little bit different to you from the previous administrations that we've had. We actually worked really hard over the past few years to reduce testing time for PARCC, and in that, not only did we reduce time, but we reduce the number of units that are part of the operational assessment. So I think in previous years, if students had a PARCC ELA field test unit, they would take a total of 4 units, but we've reduced that. So it would only be 3 units this year. So this chart shows the operational units, and then for grades 3, 6, and one of the high school grades, there'd be 1 additional unit of that same testing time. So 3rd graders will have 2 operational units and 1 field test unit, all of which will be 75 minutes. And then for grades 4 through high school, they will see 2 operational units of 90 minutes, and those grades that are field testing would have 1 additional 90-minute unit. Next question in the chat was about the opt-out for paper manuals. So this is something that we were going to introduce last year, but before administration was suspended. And this is something that we've heard from a handful of LEAs that they would like the option of not receiving paper manuals. The test administrator manuals for PARCC and DC Science are available online, and some schools and LEAs prefer to access them in that way as opposed to getting physical paper copies, but that is an LEA decision and totally up to you. The content is the same for online versus the paper manuals, but some folks do prefer that kind of hard copy to be able to refer to during test administration. Particularly the test administrator manuals have all of the scripts that are needed for administering the assessment, so it's often helpful to have that hard paper copy, but that is a decision that LEAs will be able to make at for this year. And the way that you'll make that selection is through PAN, and if no selection is made through PAN, the default will be to ship paper manuals to districts and schools. So no action is needed if you do want to receive those paper manuals, but if you wish to opt out of them, you can note that in PAN during the registration process. The final note or final question I see in the chat is about the duplicate assignment safeguard. It will prevent you from registering the same student for 2 of the same assessments, so 2 grade 4 ELA. But the question is, would that not stop the system from assigning math grade 7 and 8 and algebra to the same student? It's my understanding, Dominique, that no, the safeguard would not prevent assigning 2 tests that are not the same. We can go back to Pearson and confirm that that's the case, but I believe that that safeguard would not stop the same student from being assigned to 2 different math tests. Those are, I believe, all the questions I saw in the chat. Are there any other questions about any of the assessments that we've gone over in this first portion? Okay, well, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to continue putting them in the chat or reaching out to us after the meeting. At this point, I'll turn it over to Danielle to talk a little bit more about policy for this year.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. So yesterday we released online and through the NGA bulletin our school year 2021-2022 assessment participation and performance policy. Wanted to start by saying that we really heard you when you said you wanted your policy information for statewide testing as early as possible this year. We are hoping to have all policies released in October just to kind of kick off the school year. So another example, hopefully, where you hear that we heard you and we're trying to act on and make good on our support to you this year. So this is publicly available. We've gone over all of the information on the slide, so I don't have to say it again, but we are moving forward with our required assessments in ELA math, science, alternate, and English language proficiency in the required grade levels. Next slide. So this is consistent with previous policy, so no change here, but wanted to remind everyone that we have an exception approved by the U.S. Department of Education. We actually have to reapply this year for an extension. Our advanced middle school mathematics exception expires this year. We did talk with the Department of Education, and there's no indication that they won't continue approving this policy. But our policy states that students in grade 7 or 8, as an exception, are able to take an advanced mathematics assessment in middle school. This is only for grades 7 and 8. In ESSA, you are allowed to do this in grade 8, but you are not permitted to do it in grade 7, so we did need to request an exception. However, what's really important to note, and USCD feels very strongly about this, if a student takes an advanced math assessment in middle school, they are required to take a higher level assessment as their required assessment in high school. They have to have one available to them. In our participation policy, we go through a lot of different policy scenarios, but some sample pathways you see here. If a student takes the grade 7 mathematics assessment in grade 7 and they take Algebra 1 in grade 8, they would have a required assessment in grade 9 of geometry. They would not, in addition, need to take Algebra 2. So for this group of students, they would only take one high school assessment, while others do take 2. You see as another example, if a student's taking Algebra 1 in grade 7 and Geometry in grade 8, their only high school assessment would be the Algebra 2 assessment. And that is the scenario under which someone would take Algebra 2 in high school. But lots of scenarios included in the policy document we already posted. Alternate assessment requirements, we know this, all students, including our students with disabilities and our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, are required to participate in statewide testing. We have our MSAA, our DLM, our alternate access assessment, and I know everyone has been going through the alternate eligibility process already. Next slide. This policy also talks about English learner requirements and participation. All of our English learner students are required to participate in statewide testing. In addition, we do have our ELP assessment. What is notable is our recently arrived English learner policy, again, consistent with previous years. English learners who have been enrolled in U.S. schools for less than 12 months from the first day of last year's state testing window are exempt from participating in the ELA assessment. These students still participate and are required to participate in English language proficiency as well as math and science. However, performance results from math and science are not reported. This exception can only be used once. You'll note in the policy that because we did not have statewide testing last year, we chose April 1st of 2021 as the cutoff start date. And that's outlined in the policy. Some additional participation scenarios we include in this policy document are around grading course repeaters. We imagine that this is not going to be something that comes up frequently, given the fact that we did not test in 2020 or 2021, but the policy remains the same, that our course repeaters are included in participation and performance policy. They are counted. Course repeaters only exempt from testing if they're taking a second required course in the same year. So, for example, if you're repeating Algebra 1 in the fall and you're taking Geometry in the spring and it's a new course, a new assessment, you wouldn't take both assessments in 1 year. We don't ask that anyone double test in 1 year so that they would take Geometry in the spring. We also note the policy, consistent policy around high school transfer students. So if you have a student who transfers into your school, past into calculus or something like that, they're past the courses that have required assessments, they do not assess. Mid-year transfer students, again, should take the course that best matches, assessment that best matches the course the students are in. We also have notes about high school semester and reduced schedule. So students who are taking a course on a semester reduced schedule, either in the fall or in the summer, will take the associated test in spring 2022. That is our assessment window. We only have one, it's in the spring. We also have the policy, which was consistent with last year before we suspended testing, on secondary school and adult school participation. For those students who are taking high school courses with required assessments, who are on a path for a regular diploma, or who are on a certificate pathway, are required to participate in content testing regardless of age. This does not apply to our adult-only schools who are not on a path for a regular diploma or certificate. And I see, Dominique and Kiryang, your comments about April 1st, 2021. It should be 2021. If it's not, somehow that document needed to be updated. So I will check and update it ASAP. Yep, we'll check it. Thank you very much. And we'll get posted tomorrow. So participation rate calculation, consistent again with previous years. The criteria here are students must be enrolled in a grade or course with a required assessment, and that the students are continuously enrolled during the school's test window. Or if they're not continuously enrolled, but they received a valid score. So they were able to test and received a valid score. We do have exceptions. We have exceptions for medical exemptions, and we have exceptions for recently arrived English learners. And the exceptions are for testing medical exemptions following our previous policy. In the numerator, to be counted as participant in the numerator, a student must receive a valid score and meet the attemptedness rules. So this is very small, but we do include in the policy document the participation rate calculation, which has the number of valid students in the denominator, then the numerator, and then the denominator, we have the number of students continuously enrolled, or those with a valid score, with the exceptions in there. And you see it for each grade band and for each content area. Next slide. So performance, how do we calculate performance? Again, nothing new here, but we want to share it with everyone. Students must receive a valid score. You will not receive a valid score if you test off grade. So if you are in 5th grade and you take the grade 3 assessment, that assessment is not counted for performance, and that student is not counted as a participant in the participation universe. So really important that the student tests in the grade or course they are in. Off policy would be if a student takes MSAA, but they are not deemed to be eligible. They would not be counted in the performance universe. And optional assessments are obviously not included. Students must be identified as a participant, and students must be enrolled in the full academic year. So this is where performance results are attributed to. So FAY determinations are made at the school, LEA, and state level, and that students are deemed FAY if they're enrolled for 85% of the instructional days between enrollment audit count day and the first day of the associated test window. So it's by assessment. Yeah. And our minimum number of students for school and or aggregate reporting for performance is 10. So we'll pause because we do have a couple questions. So how should we, so I see Dominique's question, and feel free, those who raised the questions, please pop off mute if you want to add clarity. How should we treat course repeaters this year since there were no tests the past 2 years? For example, if the student is retaking geometry this year, should they take geometry in the spring, even say if they're an 11th grader? Yes, if they did not, absolutely. It doesn't matter the grade they're in if they're repeating a course, right? They can take it, they should take it in 11th grade. Absolutely. The medical exemption include those students that have a COVID medical exemption. So that's a little bit different. So in the policy, you'll see, I think it's the second page, or I'm not sure what page it is, but I can share the language. Students who have COVID-19 medical consent and certification for distance learning exemptions will still need to apply for medical exemptions for testing. So that's considered a separate process. We only have the distance learning applications through this fall. So all students who require a medical exemption for testing because they are medically unable to participate will need to submit for OSCE approval on the testing exemption. Our statewide assessments are administered in person this year. So the medical exemption is different. So noted Kiryang, I note, can you provide more details on what would be considered reasonable accommodation here, as well as associated LEA expectations? Yeah, so there are some things we would like to partner with LEAs to determine what their needs are with respect to ensuring students can come into the building safely. We're talking with our front office and we're talking with LEA leaders about how to do this. Right now, we're looking for information from LEAs as to kind of what that might look like right now. So some things people have considered are early morning testing, later afternoon testing, some out of school hours we could work through. They've also discussed whether or not different locations or different buildings might be appropriate. So there's some things we're working on now. We'll be able to provide some additional guidance. So I'm seeing a question here. If students are still participating virtually, how do we document that they are not participating in PARCC testing? So a student to be exempt from PARCC testing would need to have a medical exemption for testing. And we're looking to support LEAs with reasonable accommodations for in-person testing for the rest of folks. Yes. Other questions? I know that there's some additional information that people are seeking for students who are currently with the COVID distance learning exemption, and we're looking to make sure we can provide some of those other options for reasonable accommodations for folks, and happy to talk with folks individually about how that impacts your school and LEA, your schools and LEA. Other questions? Yes, per federal policy, 95% participation will still be required. However, we know that there are impacts due to the pandemic that are challenging when it comes to ensuring, that 100% or 95% of your students participate. So we're going to be working with you closely on that and acknowledge that we are in unique circumstances for sure. And if you're not comfortable sharing, comments or questions at this time, feel free to email me directly, call us, or email ossi.assessment@dc.gov, because we know that there are individual circumstances at your LEAs that you may want to talk about these issues offline, and we're here to support you with any of that. So schedule a call. We're here for you. So given timing, I'd like to go into test integrity. Notably, we're just giving a very high-level overview here because we will have our required test security trainings later this fall. So our vision for test security in the district. It feels more important than ever at this time in the absence of data for 2 years. OSSI's goal for schools and LEAs is to deliver a uniform and equitable statewide assessment program. For assessments to yield fair and accurate results, the assessments must be administered in consistent and standardized conditions. The best way to ensure that this occurs is to ensure educators understand and recognize unacceptable and acceptable assessment practices. We know that we need to have assessments that are secure, to be able to have results that are valid for aggregate sharing. And that has been a challenge for us as we explored possibilities into remote testing. And we knew that having these standardized conditions were critical to having data that we could use for all of the uses we have in the city. And so test security is of critical importance to us this year. This overview you've seen before, but we start with our assessment policies that are created and published. They will all be published this month, so very shortly. LEA test coordinators will be trained by OSSI, and there will be a train-the-trainer model of then training their own authorized personnel. LEA test coordinators will create and submit school test security plans, which are your plans and intentions for how you will manage a secure assessment system. Test administration is then monitored by all parties, by OSSI, by LEAs, by school staff, and incidents are reported and then responded to support. At the end of testing, test security affidavits are submitted at the LEA level, and then if needed, LEA inquiries for post-administration investigations may occur. Always the hope that we don't need those. So the major tasks and dates. Our LEA test security training, we heard from folks across the board that people really appreciate the opportunity to have asynchronous online modules for training. We will continue that moving forward. And so we wanted to offer that opportunity, that it wasn't just for last year, but people really liked them. So we're going to be moving forward with that. That being said, we know that there are some people who really benefit from conversations and face-to-face interaction. So we'll be offering test security technical assistance hours by appointment for anyone who needs them. We will have a requirement that LEA test coordinators must complete a training and score an 80% or higher on the quiz. And we will be, as part of our compliance tracking that every single individual who is required completes the modules and passes the quiz before being able to test. We know that our school test security plans are due to OSSI 15 business days prior to the first day of the school's testing window. OSSI reviews hundreds and hundreds of plans, so it's really critical that we meet those deadlines so that we can review and approve so you can start testing on time, because as we know, without an approved school test security plan, we can't begin testing. We have the test windows here that we've already discussed. Those are our deadlines for getting everything completed. We'll have incident reporting and monitoring throughout the window, and then the affidavits are submitted within 15 business days of the last test administration of each assessment. Next slide. So I shared this already, but you're required to pass the quiz, 80%. We know that you can have only one LEA test integrity coordinator if you'd like to cover all assessments, pending the structure of your LEA, or you may have up to 3. So you may have an LEA test coordinator specific to PARCC and DC Science, one specific to MSAA and DLM, and one specific to access for ELLs and alternate access, or you may combine in any way. If you do have students who have access testing or alt access testing, we strongly encourage you to complete training early on, because you need that training to be able to understand how to make all of the rest of your deadlines for school test security plan creation and approval prior to the test window, which is just earlier in the season. But we will be releasing those modules earlier in the year this year. And we will be sharing new information about the office hours shortly. So just a reminder on the documents we have available and resources. Next slide. So online, we have our laws and regulation and compliance documents. Our testing integrity information is mandated by council. So we have the Testing Integrity Act of 2013. It was amended in 2015. We have regulations that are in development. We have our annual updates to our test security guidelines. We also have our test coordinator administrator manuals that have information about security guidance. And we have additional test security forms, instructional guides, and supplemental materials. I believe there's over 20 documents that kind of weave together to tell this story. All of these will be documented on our test security website, and you can see the list of information that will be shared. We will give a big post in this in the NGA bulletin when they are ready in the next 2 weeks. Next slide. So overall, our test security guidelines for 2021-22 are consistent with 2019-2020. So we wanted to make this as streamlined as possible for those of you who have been doing this a while, and also we wanted to kind of leverage some of the things we did to reduce administrative burden here. We do have some updates for access and for alternate assessments that are bolded in the document. We have some minor formatting updates, and we do have some boxes in there that are considerations due to the ongoing public health circumstances, which you may have seen from last year. Next slide. So pausing there on test security, obviously we'll have our modules coming and a lot of documents posted by the end of this month, but any questions? So Victoria, I see your question about how do test security regulations differ from test security guidelines. So regulations are the explanation of the act. It's a legal process that has happened that's been open for public comment. We're kind of stuck with legal on getting it posted. We'll get it posted. I will check in with legal as to where that stands. Test security guidelines are actually stipulated in the regulations as something that has to happen every year. The test security guidelines outline the specific policies. Regulations just kind of give a little more detail into what the act says. So our guidelines are our policies that we follow every single year. Hope that helps. Any other questions about test security? With that, I'll turn it over to Mike for accommodations.
All right, thank you, Danielle. So like Danielle mentioned earlier, we were able to release some of our policy documents earlier this year, and our testing accommodation guides for school year 21-22 were released in yesterday's NGA bulletin. So the testing accommodation guides there are 3 guides. One for students with disabilities, our part 1. Part 2 is our testing accommodation guide for English learners, and then our accessibility features and administrative consideration guide for all students. So we really took your feedback and worked diligently to get these guides out earlier to our LEAs for you to reference when preparing for your testing administration. And the guides can also be found on the OSSI website if you did not locate them in the NGA bulletin. Next slide. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about the alternate assessment eligibility process. This is your annual process for IEP teams to apply for students to participate in an alternate assessment. We know that the policy was released in August, so this is just a brief overview and just a reminder that the deadline to submit all applications for alternate assessment participation is tomorrow, October 15th. So all applications should be completed in SEDS with all supporting documentation uploaded into the student's file. I'm not going to read this entire slide, but just some key dates that the review process will begin October 18th and run through November 19th. That's when OSSI will be reviewing the applications to make a determination. LEAs will receive their final determinations in SEDS and CLIC on November 22nd, and you will also have the option to appeal any determinations that IEP teams believe are not warranted, or IEP teams believe that their students should participate in an alternate assessment. Excuse me. So the appeals window will run from November 22nd through December 17th. So again, just a reminder that the deadline to apply for alternate assessment eligibility participation is tomorrow. And lastly, just a quick overview of the exceeding 1% threshold. Again, this policy was also released in August to the 8 LEAs that exceeded the 1%. If you did not receive information about this, then your LEA was not one of the ones that exceeded the threshold, so you don't have anything to worry about. But this is just the justifications that are required by USCD for OSCE to apply for a state level waiver for exceeding the 1% cap. And justification forms for those 8 LEAs will be due on November 5th. The justification forms will be emailed. I will email the justification forms out to the 8 LEAs, but it can also be found on the alternate assessment MSAA Quickbase application. So again, those 8 LEAs that fall into this category are familiar with this process and know everything they should be doing and the activity they should be submitting, but this is just a quick overview and reminder. Next slide. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. Before I head into our final session or final topic here, just wanted to pause and ask if there are any questions on what we've covered so far. Great. Well, I'll take us into our few closing slides. I really appreciate everyone's attention and engagement. I know almost 2 hours is quite a long time to be sitting and getting a lot of information. So really appreciate all of you. Just wanted to share some high-level updates about our plans for this administration season. Listed on this slide are our anticipated dates for NGA meetings through next August. You will note that generally we meet every other month for an NGA meeting, but during test administration between February and June, we do not have NGA meetings scheduled. Throughout that time, our team will be available for technical assistance, office hours, and there are a number of trainings that we will be holding throughout that time as well that we encourage you to participate in if you would like to. So we're not going dark between February and June. We will definitely be here to help and support you, and look forward to engaging with you and helping to support a successful administration for the spring. Just a note that the best way to get up-to-date information about what's going on in the world of assessment is through the NGA bulletin. In a couple of slides, I think there'll be additional information about making sure you're registered to receive that bulletin. The anticipated topics for those NGA meetings for this year are noted here on this slide. These are very general, high-level topics, and we'll definitely be sending more detailed agendas for each meeting in a week or so prior to each meeting date. Next slide. As I mentioned, when we don't have NGA meetings scheduled in a particular time, we're not going away. You can feel free to reach out to us with any questions. We can set up technical assistance office hours. And as Deanna mentioned previously, we are working on not only setting up trainings for the various assessments, but also additional opportunities for LEAs to engage with each other through assessment support convenings, and hoping that there will be many opportunities for LEAs to kind of take a lead on particular topics in those months where we're not meeting all together as a full group. And again, if you do have recommendations for topics or things you'd like to be discussed, please feel free to shoot us an email at osce.assessment@dc.gov. And as I mentioned, the NGA bulletin is the best way to keep up with everything that's going on in the world of assessments. To become a part of the email list, you can register in eSchool Plus as any of the roles listed here: LEA Assessment Manager, MSAA Coordinator, Access Coordinator, or Assessment Point of Contact. Folks who are registered to those roles will receive the bulletin every week. If you have trouble accessing eSchool Plus or have questions about it, the data manager at your school or LEA should be familiar and able to help you get registered. And if you are a non-public test coordinator, you can register or to be added or removed from the list by emailing us at ossi.assessment@dc.gov. And I will pause here. I've seen a couple of questions come through the chat, so we'll address those. And then if there are any others, we can take those as well. So one question is, pre-COVID, there was an Aussie auditor that visited schools during test administration. Will that happen this spring? That's a really great question. Danielle, do you want to handle that one?
Sure. So right now we're monitoring the impact of the pandemic on school structures. There's not a big decision at this moment. We do know we will be moving forward with desktop monitoring for sure. But we are waiting closer to figure out as to whether or not in-person monitoring and auditing is appropriate. And that's something we'll be working with our leadership on. So there will always be monitoring, but whether or not it occurs in person will be monitored closer to testing.
And the next question I see in the chat is, by when do students need to submit medical exemptions in order to qualify?
Yeah, so medical exemptions are submitted through the OST through a medical exemption form, which will be updated and posted alongside the test security guidelines and resources in the next week or so, next 2 weeks. And because of the nature of the medical exemptions where if a student becomes ill during testing, there's a required signature on the medical exemption form. We do allow submissions up to 10 days after the test window closes, no later than 10 days after the test window closes. And it's on a rolling basis. And that determines whether or not the student is counted in the performance universe.
Taking questions a little bit out of order, and then we'll come back to the other one. Staying with the medical exemption question, do students need to apply for medical exemptions for access?
Yes, medical exemptions there's a spot where you select which assessment it applies for. Obviously, if a student is, we've had students who have been hospitalized, who've been out for a month or so, and were healthy and ready to test later. And so you do it for the assessment that it applies to. If there is something, I see the next question from Kiryong, do they need to apply for each assessment? If the physician indicates that the window is long enough where the student has a medical exemption when they're unable to participate in testing for a longer window and it applies across multiple assessments, it can be done that way. It is going to be specific to the student and their specific health situation.
And then going back a little bit, the question about, do we anticipate the test security training modules to be released before December to support access training timelines?
Yes, that is the goal. We are working on that. We have a nimbler team at the moment, but we are working on getting everything posted to you as soon as possible. So starting with all policies being released in October and then moving from there.
Are there any other questions? Folks can feel free to put them in the chat or come off mute. I thought I saw a hand raised, but maybe it went down again. All right, yeah, do you want to go to the next slide, Deanna? I do see one more question. So before we close out, in general, we expect to receive many questions about medical exemption as demand for virtual learning is increasing. How does OSSI recommend that LEAs address those concerns?
Yeah, so we're going to work on getting some talking points and language for everyone on that at the LEA Leaders Breakfast. Their early morning meeting, no longer a breakfast meeting, but an early morning meeting. There was a request for some talking points on the commitment for statewide testing, and we will include some language around this for you all as well.
Right. So this final slide just has some general contact and information links available for each assessment and also for contacting us here at the Office of Assessment. I just want to take a moment to thank you all again for your time and your attention today, and we look forward to working with you and supporting you through the 2021-22 assessment administration season. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.